My apologies if the slides are representing a Word document.
No. I think they look great, and especially I think the model RFP, it's important to cover the content so that
Because
hope we
all
do
the
justice.
information is so much now. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't know how to make arrows fly. So
Okay. Okay. We'll just wait for a few more minutes and then we will get started at 3 p.m. Thanks,
okay.
Neeti. Thanks, Gulzar sir. Good afternoon, DG sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, good afternoon, Gulzar. How are you?
I'm good, sir.
Very nice to see you.
Same here.
So let me also remove my mask. Thank you for taking time to join this very important webinar, Gulzar. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting, sir. Thank you.
I see Dr. Basavaraju also joined in. Dr. Basavaraju ji, do you want to test your mic, please?
Good afternoon, Paresh ji. This is Dr. Basavaraj. Good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shekhar Bonu, Director General, Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, Niti Aayog. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the central, state, and district officials who have joined this webinar, and also other colleagues all across India who have joined. Today, this webinar is about procurement of technical consultancies, scaling capacity within the state governments. This is the seventh session in the series of webinars which are being conducted by DMO with the objective of strengthening monitoring and evaluation ecosystem in the country. The focus of today's webinar is to understand key challenges in procurement at the state level, enable sharing of experiences and good practices in the field of procurement, and identify measures needed for scaling up of procurement capacities within the state governments. To strengthen monitoring and evaluation ecosystem across the country, definitely there's an immense need for strengthening various institutions. And as a part of that institution strengthening, there is immense need for building capabilities relating to procurement and outsourcing. Once an institution can master this art of doing good procurement and getting good quality work done by the outsourced agencies, the capability of that organization to pivot and do large amount of work increases. So in that context, procurement and capabilities become extremely critical. Development Monitoring Evaluation Office in last couple of years has managed to do 125 centrally sponsored scheme evaluation over a period of 1 year, and has been working on output outcome monitoring framework, data governance, and many other elements, aspects, which are quite challenging in scope. And we have managed to do them largely because of 2 or 3 reasons. One is definitely procurement, outsourcing, and getting things done. The second important element is having strong partnerships with knowledge institutions. And if we can have a partnership with knowledge institutions through established procurement process, I think the ability of an institution, government institutions, to leverage the immense knowledge that exists among the uh, various knowledge institutions for public policy and program purposes becomes very, very helpful. But unfortunately, procurement is not given as much importance as it should be given in a large number of government entities. And it is generally relegated to part of accounting department, whereas procurement of technical consultancies require a degree of capabilities in terms of defining the terms of reference and also qualifications and so forth. But it's also not as complex as people make out by standardizing and also by exploring the options available under general financial rules, including limited, using more extensively limited tender. I think the ability of organizations to use high quality procurement to outsource and get technical work done would expand. In the end, I also would urge that it's in addition to procurement, we should invest a lot more in building strong partnerships and work with regional universities, think tanks. And in doing so, we create a very vibrant ecosystem of monitoring and evaluation and other tasks that government does for public policy. Now, it's a great honor to introduce today's keynote speaker. I'm very glad that Sri Gul Natarajan, who is the keynote speaker for today, has found time from his busy schedule to be with us. Mr. Gulzar Natarajan has a BTech from IIT Chennai and later completed his master's in public administration from Harvard Kennedy School. He is an IAS from 1999 batch and is currently Secretary Finance Government of Andhra Pradesh. Welcome, Gulzar. It's my pleasure also to introduce other panelists of today's session. Our first panelist is Dr. Basvaraju, who is the Executive Director at Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, that is GRAM, based in Bangalore. Dr. Basavaraju is a public policy and development professional, having diversified expertise in designing and conducting large-scale multidisciplinary research and evaluation studies, developing policy, vision, and strategy documents. GRAM has been closely supporting Karnataka Evaluation Authority, and their experiences are quite valuable for all of us. Our next panelist is Nikki Arora, who is working at the intersection of law and public policy. Ms. Nidhi specializes in matters of infrastructure reforms. She completed her post-graduation in international economics law and policy from Stanford University, California, with focus on rule of law and development. She joined Niti Aayog in 2018 and has contributed extensively to enhancing private investments in public infrastructure through public-private partnerships. Last but not least, I take great pleasure in introducing Paresh Dokar. Paresh is a monitoring and evaluation specialist at DMO. Prior to DMO, he was working as manager with Accenture Management Consulting. He has over 11 years of business consulting experiences across industries. He will take us through DMO's experiences in procurement of technical consultancies. We look forward to an engaging discussion with you all. Thank you very much. And with this, I now invite Sri Gulzar Natarajan to give his keynote address. Gulzar.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon to everyone. First, thank you, sir, DMEO, for inviting me to for this discussion on a very important subject, And I must also compliment the DMEO for organizing these webinars. I've personally checked up with a couple of my colleagues and they find this extremely useful. So thank you very much. And this is a great work, sir. You should keep doing more of this. So I'll use this opportunity to basically outline what we think are challenges that we face in the state. And in some ways, while doing so, as you will see, I would end up almost listing out what are the issues involved. Now, given this is such a new area of engagement, monitoring and technical consulting services providers for monitoring and evaluation, it's quite natural that many of the activities or the issues, many of the processes are virgin, and like to that extent throws up its set of challenges for state governments. And I'll have just 5 slides. Hopefully I can compress it and keep it to less than 10 minutes, and look forward to the discussion, the other presentations and the discussion that follows, because I hope to use this more as an opportunity to sort of present the challenges that we are facing, and more as learning experience from the presentation and discussion. So the first issue, the first slide is just a sort of an index or listing of contents in the 5 slides. Now, the first point is like, it's interesting, isn't it, that like monitoring and evaluation, which is supposed to be an assessment of a performance test of programs, is not exactly a priority in our development spectrum. It is not exactly a priority among stakeholders, important stakeholders, departments, or the political representatives. It's in the mainstream. It's one could turn around and say that it is a good to have, but hardly a mainstream imperative or priority of departments. Now, can I go to the next slide, please? So let me start with this issue of defining what constitutes the issue to be evaluated, or the problem to be evaluated. Now, this is not it's a non-trivial challenge. You know, most often, whenever we occasionally do the evaluations, we don't define the challenges or define the problem statement clearly, so that in turn feeds into the design and outputs which get generated from those evaluations. So, I mean, I just listed out what are purely from a state government's perspective, and especially from Secretary Expenditure and Finance Department, what would I I would like to have in terms of what would be outputs from such an evaluation exercise. Now, some of these are specific programs which we have. One, the Nadu Nedu, is a physical infrastructure program. We spend huge amounts on this. What is it really? And there is a presumption that, you know, you put all these things in place and outcomes will naturally follow. And these are all a bunch of inputs, either physical inputs or cash transfers or other in-kind things. If you do this, outputs will follow. But we all know that's not the way. That theory of change rarely works out as we plan. So this is just a listing of questions of relevance. It would be interesting. When I came here, I tried to get our guys to sort of list out 4 or 5 of our flagship programs and figure out what exactly do we want as headline, both on the formative and the summative side. What would we want in terms of evaluations on these things? And we really struggled with it. So the next slide, please. Yeah. So the next thing is 2 things about methodology and service providers. Now, methodology, as I said, like evaluations are not quite the mainstream. They're not an important priority of departments. And whenever very few times we do evaluations, we quickly hire KPMG or one of those consulting organizations to do a quick study, which largely is qualitative, observational, anecdotal study. So at some level, it would be it's been challenging, or it is challenging within the state governments to outline the spectrum of possibilities or methodology options which are available, and then make the right choice for the specific context or evaluation that we are looking for. So there is this full spectrum of choices available, from plain administrative data analysis to field experiments to surveys and so on. And then service providers, as I told earlier, like the default option is to hire the management consultants and do a quick evaluation, which most often, almost always, is confined to qualitative assessments. Now, again, here too, we have the challenge of how do we go about doing this? Like, do we hire consulting organizations? Do we engage with research institutions? There are a large number of nonprofits who specialize in specific areas, functional domains. Do we hire them? Who are they, for example, in agriculture or in education? These are challenges which we grapple while beginning to engage with the problem. Next slide, please. This gets us to the set of problems which we encounter while doing the procurement process itself. Now, as I had said earlier, this is not a priority for departments. The priority is at best to have a nice consulting glossy study done by a consulting organization, which sort of in some ways is a sort of an endorsement of what you want the world to see or know about the program, than a genuine, rigorous impact assessment of the program. Now, and this goes one of the important contributors is, of course, the lack of acutely deficient capacity among procurement officials. And the things about standardized procurement guidelines and documents, these are well known, like, again, being new areas. We struggle with standardized procurement guidelines, for example, for doing an evaluation of learning outcomes. Just a simple thing from hiring a agency to do a sample survey of learning outcomes on a longitudinal basis every year for the next 3 years. Like, for example, if you want to do, where's the document? What are the guidelines for that? So then of course, where documents are available, we struggle with challenges in customizing those documents, the bid documents and the contract agreements. Now, specification of terms of reference. Now, this is important because many of these areas are really new, in the sense it's not possible for us ex ante to have absolute clarity about what is it that we want to evaluate. As we go along, we realize that, like, for example, with education, we need to sort of shift a little bit and say evaluate how teacher trainings are going on, because that's a proximate process indicator perhaps to the final outcome that we are measuring. Now, this calls for flexibility in the documents in such a manner that we sort of are able to sort of on the while at the process, we are able to tweak the terms of reference. Then there is this thing about minimum technical and financial criteria which limit entry barriers to now this technical and financial criteria are important because the criterion and the standard bid documents were available for general consulting service providers or technical consultancy providers are in some ways have very high financial, technical, experiential requirements which limit the non-profits and others who have deep functional expertise in those areas. Next, please. Then there is this contract duration. Now we all want this evaluations yesterday. So basically, this is like a constraint. So we don't have the flexibility, or most often when the need for evaluation comes, it's like we need to have it in 2 months or 3 months. So there is a genuine challenge of reconciling rigor with practical exigencies, which then goes back to what instruments or what methodologies do we use to do it in a manner which does a good compromise between rigor and what is required. Then the bid reference date, there are wide variations in the rates of different categories of these service providers. At top level consulting organization rates, its quotes will be like 4 or 5 times that of a non-profit or a research institution. Then of course, and which in turn feeds into this excessively low and high bids, which creates a set of problems. Last one, please. Yeah, and then so those were problems we have on the contract, on the procurement process side. Now on the contract management side, again, going back to this challenge of capacity and lack of culture and capabilities within the institutional capabilities, this creates a set of problems which I guess is part of any sort of ongoing engagement which we conduct within government. So to that extent, it's perhaps generic, not exclusively related to the specific issue of procurement of consulting service providers. And the last thing I wanted to just put it out there is that supply side quality. Now, this is something which we underestimate or perhaps not discussed seriously, because there is an acute scarcity of, or acute deficiency of good organizations and individuals within organizations who can engage deeply on these problems and be able to deliver high quality evaluations which respond to the felt needs of the government stakeholders. So in very sort of brief, these are the challenges that we face at the state level while engaging with the problem of procuring technical consultancy service providers for M&A. As I said earlier, these are in some ways a list of all the processes or activities which are involved with this, but I think each one of them have an important source of, or at least a non-trivial source of challenge for the state governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gulzar, for highlighting the importance given to monitoring and evaluation at states, the need for prioritizing monitoring and evaluation as such, but also the challenges in terms of raising understanding the link, the programs and the outcomes that we would like to achieve, and so defining what are the outcomes and what are the key metrics that we would use to measure those outcomes, and then this whole ecosystem around doing high quality evaluation. So I think all these issues we have been grappling also at the national level at the Development Monitoring Evaluation Office, and over 3 years we have built some understanding and knowledge which we thought it was critical to share with our state colleagues. So with this, I now request Paresh to present DMO's experiences in procurement of technical consultancies. Paresh?
Thank you so much, sir. And thanks, Gulzar, sir, for setting the context. And as DG sir pointed out, the challenges that you spoke about at the state level are very much similar that we encountered 3 years back when we started this journey. I'm guessing most of the central ministers' departments are also going through the same learning process. And hopefully our session today would add some value and also enable some exchange of some experiences and good practices. Before I get started, just a gentle reminder to all our attendees. If you have any questions, please feel free to type in your queries in the chat box. Also, feel free to raise your hand. Probably towards the Q&A session, the host will unmute you and allow you to post your query. So with that, we get started with talking about DMU's journey, the last 3-year journey in creating this capacity in procurement of technical consultancy. So over the next 15 minutes, probably what I would want to quickly cover is talk about the aims and principles that Government of India has set it up for itself in terms of public procurement. Thereafter, we'll talk about some model documents that are readily available today, ready templates, ready model requests for proposals. There are general financial rules and manual for GFR. So we'll talk about those model documents which are readily available, which can be of great use if you're starting this journey now. We will talk about a typical procurement process. How does an open tender works versus a limited tender versus a nomination-based procurement? And towards the end, I will briefly cover what are some recent initiatives that DMU has undertaken so as to expedite the whole procurement process. So we brought in a lot of initiatives around standardizing documents, and Nidhi is on the call. She has been of great help to us in actually building the capacity within DMU. So with that, let me start with the first section. Next slide, please. So the aims and principles of public procurement, we as procurement professionals, we have only one objective to find that right balance between cost and requirements. The manual for procurement lays that the professionals need to ensure that you find the right quality at the right quantity at the right price, and obviously at the time that we want. You can't delay a lot. At the place that we have chosen and to the right sources. So you can't favor one set of organizations over the other. So these are the challenges. Finding a right balance between these 5 criteria becomes often a nightmare for the procurement professionals. Next slide, please. So what are the principles that we need to follow while doing any public procurement, whether it's goods, whether it's works, whether it's consultancy or non-consultancy services? We broadly talk about 5 principles. One, we need to be transparent. We need to ensure that whatever we do is fair and everybody is given equal rights. Second, professionalism. We need to act as professionals. We need to ensure that we offer the best level of services at the same time. Also ensure that whatever process that we have set for ourselves, the communication that we have, ensure that we follow those professionalism principles. Third, broader obligations principle. The Government of India has some broad obligations set up for itself. So any public procurement you do, make sure that you do not violate any of those obligations. Whatever we do is in the broader obligations principle. Fourth, extrinsic legal principle. You need to ensure at whatever time you're doing public procurement, it follows the rules of the land. Often they are documented in terms of manuals, in terms of rules, and often you'll have the circulars that various central ministers and departments keep circulating. So you need to ensure that you abide by those legal principles. Last but not the least, and the most important one, public accountability. You are answerable to the citizens of this nation, and hence whatever steps you take in public procurement, make sure that you are fair to the public. Next slide, please. So setting up this ground rules for any public procurement. What are those documents which can give you a head start in public procurement, and specifically talking about procurement of technical consultancy? We extensively use 3 documents. Whoever I think is a procurement professional will have this hard copies kept right next to the table. So what is the first one? First one is GFR 2017. GFR was first introduced in 90s and then revised in 2005. And now the latest one is GFR 2017. What you see on the left is basically a table of contents of GFR. Probably in today's call, we'll briefly cover procurement of services. And within procurement of services, we'll talk about consultancy services. Second document, the one that you see at the middle, is Manual for Procurement of Consultancy and Other Services. This manual further details down every rule that is provided in GFR 2017. It includes the detailed templates. It talks about the procedures to be followed. And thereafter, it will also talk about do's and don'ts, exceptions, how do we manage that. The third document that you see on the right is the model request for proposals that was released in May 2006 by Department of Expenditure. While the document is 15-year-old, but it is as relevant as it was earlier. Often I discuss with my colleagues how some of those clauses are just beyond perfection. You will realize when you start using model RFP and when you start implementing a particular project, how these clauses have been very well drafted. So those are the three documents that we extensively use in procurement of technical consultancy. Next slide, please. Talking about GFR 2017, GFR classifies the public procurement into three different categories. Works, rules 130 to 141 refer to that. So it includes original works, it includes minor works, it also includes repair works associated with the former two. Then you have procurement of goods, which relate to rules 142 and 176. It talks about all products, all goods, any software, any integrated production process-based machineries, all are covered under procurement of goods. Talking about services, GFR distinguishes services into two different broad categories. One is consulting service, which relates more to non-physical, project-specific processes, where the outcomes deliverables may change from one consultant to other. So when we talk about monitoring and evaluation based professional services, we are talking about consulting services there. Thereafter, you have non-consulting services where they are largely physical, measurable deliverables, outcomes based, where performance standards can be clearly identified and consistently applied. Example here could be hiring of vehicle services, or could be hiring of washer services, whatever. It could be, one where the performance standards are highly identified and, consistently applied. So what we're going to talk about in next few slides is consulting services, where M&E falls into that domain. Next slide, please. So yeah, we will be talking about rules 177 to 196. It is the section 6, subchapter 2. In terms of consultancy services. But while there are specific rules which are defined for consultancy, but then a lot of these clauses might not be repeated under services, or might not be repeated under work. So although couched under procurement of goods, some clauses are equally applicable to procurement of consultancy and other services. So just to caveat there. Next slide, please. Okay, I know Neil is going to cover this slide in far more details, but this is how a model RFP looks like. It has three clear sections: invitation for proposals, schedules, and appendices. Appendices is where we have all the templates. Schedules is probably the brain of this model RFP. It includes terms of reference where we set expectations with the consultant. And invitation for proposals, the very first section talks about the procedure, the procurement process that the bidding authority is going to follow to do this procurement process. So this particular section A, invitation for proposals, has some very brilliantly drafted clauses when it comes to conditions of eligibility, evaluation, talking about how key personnel will be substituted, and also project-specific flexibility. Some clauses might change from project to project. So this particular model RFP very brilliantly gives us that flexibility, at the same time ensures standardization of our bid documents, as Gulzar sir was talking about. One of the challenges that we face in terms of public procurement. So we'll talk about this in far more details, but these are the three documents that we extensively refer to in our procurement of technical consultancy. Next slide, please. So talking about how does a typical procurement process looks like, we'll first talk about the open tender process. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we talk about open tender process, we're talking about three different modes of procurement. Often, if you talk to various professionals in government services, they would probably have heard about only open tender process. But there are also more other options that are available at your behest if you want to expedite procurement. So what you see on the slide is three different modes of procurement. Procurement by nomination, procurement by empanelment or a limited tender process, and procurement by advertisement or an open tender process. So as per GFR 2017, if the budget is above 25 lakh rupees, you will have to go through an open tender process, open tender procurement process, which requires you to have a thorough advertisement done. If your budget is less than 25 lakh rupees, you have an option to go through a limited tender process. Limited tender process means you do tendering with a limited set of institutions. That list of institutions could have been arrived based on empanelment, or could have been arrived based on some formal, informal queries, or some rankings of central ministry departments. So if you can find a fair, transparent way to find those very qualified institutions, you can opt to go for consultancy by empanelment, where the budget is less than 25 lakh rupees. The third option we have, and it should be very selectively used, is the nomination-based procurement, where there isn't a real limit to it. It is governed by delegation of financial powers. But yes, in extreme exigencies, contingencies, nomination-based route can also be followed. What you see on the slide here is those three different types of procurement, and limited tender is one of the most least used, but we would probably try to encourage you to make more use of limited tender process, where you would have already done a part of evaluation as part of the organizational appraisal when you do empanelment. This will help you to expedite the procurement process and reduce the overall time that goes into procurement. Next slide, please. So how does a typical open tender procurement process looks like? This is where we talk about doing procurement through advertisement. So we start up with preparing a detailed terms of reference and RFP. So again, they will help us understand how we go about drafting that RFP. So that's the most important part. If you do not get the terms of reference right, probably you'll struggle at the implementation stage. So it's important that you get the expectations set upfront in the terms of reference itself. Thereafter, you invite proposals. We have now moved 100% to central public procurement portal-based e-procurement. All our procurements are now done digitally, which has brought in far more transparency and accountability that we were talking about. Thereafter, the evaluation is done under the guidance of a technical evaluation committee. And again, it's done in a very fair, transparent manner. Once technical evaluations is done, the technically qualified proposals, we go ahead with financial evaluation and then award the contract to the highest scoring applicant. So that's broad open tender procurement process. Next slide, please. The limited tender process is very much similar to the open tender procurement process, with only one difference being shortlisting of the institutions upfront. So you can do shortlist of institutions based on any available fair, transparent list. As I said, we encourage you to go with empanelment route there. But once you've shortlisted institutions, then the process is very much similar to open tender procurement process. Again, while the GFR allows you to do all procurement through CPP portal, you will also need to probably add this empanel institutions to your selected list of institutions when you do a limited tender on CPP portal. Next slide, please. Now coming on to terms of reference, this is where I was talking about the brain of the RFP. Over the last 3 years, we have tried to play around with what are the key clauses that are needed. There is a structure that is also recommended by the model RFP. But what you see on this slide is pretty much a broad outline of how a terms of reference should be. Start with talking about a background of your problem statement. Why are you doing this particular public procurement? Thereafter, jump into objectives of the study. Talk about the proposed methodology approach that you would want the consultant to follow. Then talk about scope of services. Scope of services is where probably if you get it right here, you will face lesser issues at the implementation stage. We will not have scope creep issues, typical of any procurement that we do. Because we are talking about monitoring evaluations, primary data collection, conducting KIIs with stakeholders becomes important. So that has dedicated chapters. Talk about your time schedule, deliverables, payment schedule, some very standard clauses. Talk about how the report or the deliverables will look like, what support that you will provide. And then towards the end, you can talk about review and governance structure. So this is broadly the terms of reference outline that we follow. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have covered this. I'll leave it to Needhi to talk about the model RFP, how to create a model RFP. based on how do you create an RFP based on the model RFP template. So we'll skip this slide for now. Next slide, please. Okay, so over the next couple of minutes, I'll quickly cover what DMO has done to expedite the procurement process. I will not be able to go into far more details here, but if you have any questions after the webinar, we will be happy to help you out there. So talking about what all initiatives has DMO undertaken. Next slide, please. So broadly, these initiatives are bucketed into four specific categories. The first one, we have released our guidelines for engagement of knowledge institutions. So this provides us internal approvals based on how do we go about doing procurement. So that has reduced our time to procurement, get internal approvals of finance division and from the competent authority. So the guidelines are very well drafted. The three procurement processes that I spoke about, nomination, empanelment, and open tender procurement process, are very well documented, and procedures have been agreed internally already. The second initiative that we have started running is the empanelment part. We have already finished empanelment of survey institutions. So if we were to launch a survey tomorrow, probably we can do a very limited tender, either only just financial evaluation or techno plus financial evaluation, and actually roll out the study in a couple of weeks' time. The third initiative that we have taken is standardization transparency. As I said, we have moved 100% to the digital CPP portal. We have standardized a lot of our templates so that it becomes easy for the bidder as well when he sees consistency, the same set of procedures, the same set of forms. We have moved into providing scanned PDF based submission of forms to Excel based forms. So it becomes easier for them to submit their responses, becomes easier for us to evaluate them. So those are certain steps that we have taken in terms of standardization transparency. Last but not the least, we also want to take the whole ecosystem with us as we evolve in this journey. So we have created our own procurement toolkit. This procurement toolkit is available on DMO website. It's available, the sessions on training are available on YouTube channels so that all the states, districts, central ministries and departments can take help from them. Next slide, please. So this is how the monitoring evaluation study guidelines looks like. It's a 20-page, very brief document. It allows us to do three things. One is conduct studies and related surveys through the three model procurement modes that we spoke about. It allows us to also do a desk-based research, allows us to reach out to individual consultants to help us conduct studies. And last, it also allows us to do training and sensitization programs as far as it's within the broader framework of program objectives. Next slide, please. Empanelment, what you see on the slide is three different options available for empanelment. Different ministries have reached out to different modes of empanelment for their respective needs. So if you talk about RBI, they would probably empanel based on rate per unit or fixed price empanelment. DMO has chosen to empanel survey institutions without agreeing on any financials. So financials will be taken at the next stage, which is project RFP. So the details of this procurement are available on the DMO website as well. Next slide, please. What you see on the slide is how the empanelment list looks like. So for survey institutions, we have a list of 28 institutions where we have classified them by size of firm. So if you want to restrict your procurement only to MSMEs, you can do that. You can apply that filter. It takes care of the type of surveys, the experience that they have. Some of them, specialize in household establishment surveys, while some of them could specialize in just KIIs. So we have actually categorized by type of surveys, the 15 sectors where they have previous experience in, states where they have presence today, and last, based on their technical scores, we have graded them as well. So this list is available on DMO website. It is available for all states, all central ministries departments to leverage that for the limited tender process. Next slide, please. Probably the second last slide. This is giving a snapshot of the procurement toolkit, which is available on the DMO website. As I spoke about, all the model RFP documents, the guidelines, the samples, the templates, for that matter, 7-session recordings to walk you through how to use these templates is also available on DMO website. Next slide, please. I was talking about the 7 sessions. This is how the curriculum looks like. It starts from introducing you to government rules and procedures, then jumping on to how do you draft a TOR, how do you draft an RFP, and then gets into limited tender and open tender procurement process. This gets a little trivial by using, because we make use of CPP portals. There are detailed user guidelines also available on as part of the toolkit. So as I said, this is available for consumption on the DMU website and on the YouTube channel as well. Next slide, please. Last but not the least, often in any government procedures, it's very important to get the segregation of duties done. That's why we leverage here the RACI metrics, where all the steps, and if I remember correctly, this talks about close to 180 odd steps, just to ensure that we do not miss any of them. So this document is also available on our DMU website. It clearly talks about, at least for DMU, what are the steps that we follow and who is accountable, who is responsible, who has to be consulted or informed at various stages, and do's and don'ts. Often during the experience, you realize that there should be few things that you should have not done. There are few things that you should have done. Very trivial as do not mark the recipients in 2 or CC. If there are a long distribution list, probably put them in BCC. So to that level, we have tried to capture them in the SOP. So that is briefly talking about all the TMU's experience in the last 2.5, 3 years that we have been able to create in procurement of technical consultancy. We don't say we are experts. We are still learning. But yes, we hope that you also can probably leverage few of these documents as you start this journey in your respective states or districts. With that, I pass it over back to you, DG sir.
Yeah, thanks, Paresh, for the very interesting presentation. And now I would request Ms. Nidhi Arora to make a presentation on best practices in procurement and adoption of model RFP in procurement of technical consultancy. The floor is yours, Nidhi.
Thank you, Dr. Bonus. Good evening, everyone. It's particularly wonderful to be here, interacting with states on this subject matter, what I regard as extremely more than central to the functioning or functionality of the whole concept of governance. Particularly because we're talking about monitoring and evaluating the public fund that we spend in terms of policy and programs. So I think this is one of the most key elements that we need to check ourselves and work on. So the presentation I'm going to make, the next 4 or 5 slides, of course, aiming to be in the time given, is sort of a deep dive into a lot what Paresh has covered, but we are just going to go deeper into the whole idea of the bidding process and how it can be more relevant, or what kind of practices make it more relevant for monitoring and evaluation services, keeping in mind the ideas laid down in the model documents. So if you find certain bullets repetitive, just bear with me, because they will lead to a larger point, which hopefully is not repetitive. So of course, in introduction to this particular webinar, and of course in the preceding presentations, we've gotten the idea of how important or critical it is a responsibility of state government to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of public expenditure. And of course, we've done a deeper understanding of the challenges that are faced by the state governments in giving effect to these evaluations, be it in-house or when they try to engage it through third-party consultants, etc. So the way I see it, or the way we see it, is that this entire concept of M&E procurement has to be in 2 parts. One is, of course, the selection process, and the other, equally important, is the contract management. Because the idea is that one is, of course, emphasizing on getting reputable, credible, effective parties on board, consultants on board to do the job, and then, of course, monitor how the job is being done. So the first aspect being implementing a fair and transparent bidding process. Went into the details of this, that your RFP needs to specify certain important elements such as conditions of eligibility, terms of reference, etc., and pre-specifying criteria for evaluation. Most importantly, it needs to include a draft consultancy agreement in the RFP itself, so that before the parties submit their bids, their intention to participate, etc., they know what conditions would apply to them over the years that or over the months that they are delivering these services. I'm going to touch on the GFR to make a larger point here. While, of course, the effectiveness of quality and cost-based system is very well accepted across the board, but there are certain areas, or there are certain procurement agencies which perhaps can make use of this discussion once again, that how a QCBS, a quality and cost-based system, is preferable, advisable for M&E consultancy services compared to a least cost system, or colloquially known as the L1 mechanism. GFR talks about both these systems and a couple of other methods of selection, which Paresh touched upon. But stating the obvious, QCBS is something which needs to be absolutely kept in mind when quality of consultancy is of prime concern. The delicate balance that this particular system tries to achieve between technical capacity or the technical qualifications of your consultant and the cost at which they're willing to do. So for that delicate balance, it's very important to keep coming back to this as the method. The least cost system, according to GFR, is of course relevant, but more so for standard or routine nature assignments, because this system does not give any weightage to technical scores. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to take a deeper dive into what actually is the quality and cost-based selection. Of course, we'll take a further deep dive when we talk about how it is covered in the model RFP. Very simply put, I think Paresh was in his roadmap for procurement that he was talking about, he's covered this. Quality and cost-based selection actually looks at the technical score and the financial score of the applicants, and then combines the two to arrive at the highest scorer, who then becomes your selected applicant or your consultant to deliver the job. Now, what is important to remember here is that the GFR gives this particular flexibility, that while in a QCBS system, it's important to give more weightage to technical aspects, but there is some kind of a range of, let's say, between 60 and 80% that can be played with in terms of the technical aspects of the project or the assignment at hand. Once again, stating the obvious, on the second bullet that you see on your slide is very, very important, because it kind of highlights why QCBS is important, why QCBS needs to be preferred, and what is it that least cost system fails to deliver, or the unwarranted results that it ensues. So we've already covered that where you're looking at highly specialized, non-repetitive and non-standard services, it is important to judge the experience, expertise, and competence of the consultant. More importantly, where you're only looking at the cost being quoted, there is a very, very real chance of the assignment being awarded to an inferior or perhaps even incompetent consultant. So the reason why this particular conclusion gets occasioned is because a consultant who plans to execute the job in a certain qualitative manner, deploying a certain quality of resources, will not be able to, or rather will lose out to someone or who does not plan to deliver that kind of quality in a price competition, because his product, his services to you would be more expensive compared to someone who is planning to execute in a slightly inferior manner, if I may use the words. And of course, the chances of abnormally low bids are a very, very real possibility in a least cost process. So it is worthy here, that the economic survey also, quoting a CVC paper, said that while L1 or least cost process may still hold good for procurement of routine works, goods, and non-consulting services, but not for high impact and technologically complex procurements. Next slide, please. So this is the promised tour of the model RFP, at least from our perspective, as to why the document, though I take the point made in the earlier presentation that it could be a challenge to adopt a standardized document for a custom transaction. But I concede to Paresh's point here that the way this document is designed, with a little bit of work, it can definitely be adopted and would lead to the envisioned results. So very quickly, the document deploys QCBS system. And it is important to note here that back in 2009, when it was issued by the Department of Expenditure, it was a result of an extensive interministerial consultation and across the board discussion with stakeholders and experts. So while of course largely issued for adoption by the central government ministries and entities, but this particular document can be adopted by the state governments as a best practice document. It is important to mention here that, you know, the principles of public procurement that Paresh was talking about, this particular document embodies, lives and breathes them in terms of transparency, fairness, cost effectiveness, and very importantly, elimination of conflict of interest, which is extremely critical to a transparent and accountable procurement process. The document is generic in nature, but at the same time, it has a lot of flexibility to include and write project-specific aspects, and there are footnotes that guide you through the process of making those changes to a very large extent. And of course, this is my favorite feature of the document, the fact that it actually goes to the next step of ensuring there's a structure for even monitoring of services after the award of assignment. The model RFP talks in terms of the first feature, of course, which is prominent to the document, is that while it seeks one proposal, but there are two aspects to it, that of a technical bid and a financial bid. Paresh has gone into this, but I'm just going to quickly mention that technical bid is all about establishing the eligibility, just about the information that he needs to put, the applicant needs to put to confirm their compliance with conditions of eligibility. The financial bid is where they tell you the money or the cost or the price that it will take for them to deliver the job. The conditions of eligibility, I think, are the heart and soul of this document, you know, after the consultancy agreement, of course, because you see, this is what sets the path of the kind of consultant you will get on board. So while it may take a lot of effort to come up with the technical capacity or the financial capacity best suited to your project, but it's worth the effort. And the model RFP has the broader structure in which this can be put in, along with guiding footnotes. So list the eligible assignments that you want the consultant to have done in the past, list it in terms of the nature, the number of assignments, the value of those assignments in terms of cost, etc. Very importantly, talk about the financial capacity. The point made in the earlier presentation is well taken, that this is when defining the minimum financial capacity or the minimum income that the applicant should have received, you know, from professional fee as a threshold. A call needs to be taken as to the kind of applicant pool that you want to let participate in the process. So depending on that, you keep it lower, you keep it higher. Again, the model document with the footnotes guides you through the process. The third important aspect of eligibility, of course, remains, and which I think is very, very, very essential to this kind of an assignment of M&E, because it is the people that come on board to do the job that determine how the job will get done. So list out the key personnel that you need mandatorily to be on the job, list their qualifications and their past assignment. Next slide, please. Yes. In the second slide of the features of RFP and the last one for my presentation, we are just going to talk about a few other features. Terms of reference. Now, I think enough has been said, and the term has actually come up quite a bit in the last hour. Now, while of course, you know, Paresh covered in great detail as to what all you need to write, one reason why it is important to nail this absolutely correctly is because this is what actually determines your financial bids. It is very important that all the applicants participating in the process, to the extent possible, have a uniform understanding, a comparable understanding of the work that they need to deliver. Because that would, to a very large extent, ensure that their financial bids are competitive and comparable in a way we want them to be. So again, a very important aspect to get right in your RFP. Once again, model RFP guides you through the process. I understand that it is difficult, or other challenges may come in adapting it for your own transaction, but with the broad headings that Paresh mentioned and the model lays down, filling it up, though difficult, is worth the time. This second last feature of the RFP that I want to talk about is the evaluation process. So the idea being that open the pool of applicants as large as you can, but shortlist them in terms of their technical competencies and then take them with you to the next stage of the financial evaluation. So in the first stage, when the technical bids are opened, the only responsive bids which have a minimum score should be taken to the next round. Model lays down an indicative weightage for the firm experience, the proposed methodology, and the key personnel. But of course, the same can be altered to some extent. It is advised that no more than 5 applicants should be shortlisted for financial evaluation. But again, a call that a model has, the due guiding notes to let you take the number higher or lower. So in the second stage, a very important one, the financial bids are open, where you then score the financial quotes made. So the way it works is that the person quoting, the applicant quoting the lowest gets 100, and then as is the central scheme of evaluation under this RFP, it's all relative marking. So at any given point in time, your benchmark is set by the highest submission, which could be the lowest financial quote or highest number or quality of the eligible assignment. So by doing this relative marking, then you come to arrive at the total score, where the total score is a product, rather, it's a product of adding the technical score and the financial score multiplied by their respective weights. When laying down or mapping the selection, you rank the proposals according to their combined scores. Selected applicant typically is your highest combined scorer. The RFP lays down the procedure should such a person not be able to accept the assignment, then what happens, etc. And further, it furthers other scenarios that could be relevant to the period between selection and awarding of the contract. The following is the last item in my presentation, and I think I touched upon the importance of it in the very first slide, that this is one of the best features of the model RFP, because getting a consultation agreement right is very, very critical. And most of the terms and conditions of this kind of an agreement are standard or boilerplate. So model helps you in adopting those boilerplate, tried and tested, best of international practices oriented terms and conditions, in terms of parties' obligations, how you can make a modification to the scope of work should the occasion so arise, permitted change of key personnel, because at the end of the day, in a longer contract, not everything can be foreseen, or it can be rightly addressed should it so arise. There are damages and penalties that are being talked about, dispute resolution being talked about. So although not mentioned here, but a critical aspect is that the term of reference that you include in the RFP, which lays down the services, the deliverables, the payment, etc., it all becomes a part of your consultancy agreement eventually. So this again is very rightly connected to the whole idea of, after you've awarded the contract, your work as the project authority, procurement agency, government entity, your work actually starts, because getting the right kind of deliverables is equally our responsibility as well as that of the consultant delivering it. So that'll be all from my side, DG sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi, for excellent presentation. For everyone who's on the call, when we started doing our procurement for 125 centrally sponsored schemes simultaneously through 10 packages, Nidhi and Lord Sanjay Saha, who used to work at the time in Niti Aayog, provided extensive support. And slowly, with their initial support, we built our internal capabilities, and Nidhi continues to support us. So it's possible for institutions to start at a very base level and slowly build. And then, of course, efforts have to be made to retain that knowledge within that institution. So one thing that we are trying to do in DMO is to build procurement capabilities, understanding across all the staff who are in DMO. Close to 80 staff. They are all engaged in some or other part of the procurement, given its importance. Now, with this, I will now request Dr. Basavaraju to talk about the role of partnerships at state level and way forward. Basavaraju, your floor is yours.
At the outset, sir, for this opportunity, I'm greatly indebted to all the support DMU is bestowing on GRA. under your leadership and the Niti Aayog team. My apologies, I don't have a presentation, sorry, PowerPoint presentation. I was asked to speak on partnership. So partnership should be built not based on power, it should be built based on recognition, responsibility, and respect. So with this, I'll go to my presentation today. It was wonderful to hear Gulzar Natarajan's presentation. It was very apt, and he was raising many issues from the procurer's perspective. I feel my sharing today would answer some of his questions, as well as I would say, as taking cue from Paresh's presentation, it should be right. Yeah, but it should be right for both to the state as well as to the partner. So then only the partnership is sustainable. I understand partnership is all about complementing strengths. Each one of us bring strength to the table. So it has to be complemented. It has to be taken forward in a cohesive manner. It's all about, as we say in management, win-win. So both we should come out with a wonderful evaluation, output and outcome. So a sustained partnership for policy augmentation. Government, policy think tanks, academic institutions, and more importantly, civil society organizations need to increasingly work together for creating PPP. I quote. I don't mean public-private partnership here. I mean pro-people, participatory, and plural public policy. Plural I'm using as an adjective here, which is diversity, inclusion, and affirmative public policy. So when only all these pillars of development, public policy come together, we can envisage a wonderful evidence-based policy making milieu in our country, I believe. You may ask why partnership in the evaluation space. Normally, we have heard partnership for implementing public programs, but why it is all the more important in the evaluation, research, and policy making affairs actually. But before coming into the qualitative aspects of the advantages, let me put up some numbers in front of you. As Shekhar sir was quoting our experience of supporting Karnataka government in creating Karnataka Evaluation Authority. Thanks to the government for giving that opportunity to GRAM. Before creating the Karnataka Evaluation Authority, the department used to do an average of 4 to 5 evaluations per year. But after establishing an exclusive authority, on an average, 25 studies are being done every year. So that is something you can say almost 500% increase, you can say. But is government investing a lot of resources, especially human resources, for deriving this outcome, deriving this output? I don't, it's not correct actually if you are guessing. It's 15 to 16 professionals, technical professionals are involved. Of course, around equal number of administrative staffs are also there in the authority. But with 15 to 16 professionals, they are managing this volume. That's something we need to recognize, number one. Secondly, if they were to do all the evaluations themselves, even you take at least 5 people should have invested their time in for each study, not less than 125 people are required. Understand how financially it is beneficial to the state having partnership for evaluations. Coming to the qualitative aspects of advantages through partnership. One is it brings in thematic knowledge. Public policies, as we all understood, is a multidisciplinary and multidimensional actually. And you need to have multidisciplinary people to participate in evaluation activity. And their time is not always required. We don't get to do evaluation of different disciplines, different domain all the times. It is all time specific. So you don't need to invest on them full time, but you can still avail their services when you need. That's the advantage of partnership. Secondly, most importantly, it is field experience they bring in. Normally, these partners are not just on the other side of the table, that is only making policies or developing programs. They are the beneficiaries of the program. They would be observing its implementation in the field. That's add a lot of value and dimension when the evaluation design is expected to be developed. And more importantly, the partners' grassroots leakages. Data collection becomes key and easy. I tell my own example actually. So because we come from a not-for-profit domain, the civil society organizations domain. So we have a grassroots network of NGOs in each district. We can go up to the block level. So wherein the data collectors need not have to move from outside. So the cultural understanding, the local language, everything is taken care when you work with grassroots knowledge. Of course, it comes with little more responsibility of equipping them to do a data collection job. And fourth is their ability to rope in required subject matter specialists. It's not so easy for government to immediately procure some subject matter specialist or expert services, but it is easy once it is given to the partner organization. They can exercise those responsibilities to avail these services. And most importantly, as we all expect, the evaluation should be unbiased, because it's going to be a third party, completely somebody not who's the party in the whole program implementation would be evaluating the the specific program or policy. It brings up that research neutrality. There is no biased opinion towards either to project a program positively or negatively. And multiple studies can be done at the same time. As I already explained through evidence and numbers, you can do multiple studies at the same time, ensuring optimal utilization of both resource HR and as well as time available. And quality evaluation outputs can be derived if state works with partners. How it is actually? The authorities or the units will have more time to facilitate and monitor. Otherwise, they would become doers. There is no time to review or monitor, and can take critical review of methodology and reports from time to time. And diverse expertise, unlike research studies, this evaluation requires programmatic as well as pragmatic insights in both policy as well as at the grassroots level issues. So, for example, if you ask me why some health system people are not participating, actually the policy expects them to be an active part of all this, people participation committees actually. Jan Arogya Samiti or Arogya Raksha Samitis. So to answer your question pragmatically, it requires to have an expertise and experience at the field level also from the grassroots perspective. But creating this partnership is not so easy, as Nidhi was also explaining that if you go with only financial criteria, we may get the mediocre organizations quoting less budget and grabbing those contracts, and that's what happening in our experiences also. You might be knowing Karnataka came out with evaluation policy in 2000 actually. So that means what state expected or mandated is every scheme which with the budget outlay of more than 1 crore should be evaluated by an external agency during the plan period. That was in brief the policy was all about. But since there was too many programs with an outlay of more than 1 crore, it was envisaged that each line department would select at least one key plan or non-plan scheme for evaluation continuously. That means there was need for suddenly for the planning department, the volume increased. There was a need for more organization and partners were felt. But where are they? Until then, never thought about developing partnership base, understanding the competencies of different institutions in the state, etc. The question started. Actually, need was the major reason for Karnataka's evaluation manual, or partnership evaluation, evaluation empanelment manual actually. So, but there were difficulties were encountered by the department also in procuring suitable agencies and undertaking for evaluations. There was no specific criteria to empanel agencies for conducting evaluations. So also there was any agency could have empaneled and bid for an assignment irrespective of having required qualification also. It was just kind of an empanelment, not by going through seriously their criteria. It is just based on their basic existence, some key turnovers, etc. So limiting factor was that the expected outputs of evaluation of services was also not amenable to the tangible standards. And smaller organizations and consulting agencies, often were underbidding and compared to established research institutions. And of course, it contributed to substandard reports. For all these reasons, there was again the government thought and to create an evaluation authority and have systems and processes developed and engage agencies. But how? As one of the major challenge for us was like how to compare apple to apple. The present policy was actually we were comparing sometimes apple to orange, apple to banana, various things actually. So there has to be a uniform. First of all, we thought we will empanel, we will screen the agencies based on all the administrative criteria. We'll just do the screening and do the desk review of that organization to understand their competencies, suitability, etc., and reject at that level. So once it is rejected, they can only apply after 1 year time actually. They need to work on their limitation and only they can come back for empanelment after 1 year. So once the desk review was completed, the process we followed was to do a field validation. But sometime, unfortunately, that was skipped by the state actually. Field validation required a lot of independent assessors also, because there was no government machinery to go to organization, physically understand and verify whether the organization is having all those resources they claim actually. That was subsequently skipped. But then after that, it will go to an evaluation committee with the combined score, both the application, what they submitted, as well as the score given by independent assessor. Then either the application was rejected or next submitted to the grading and intimation processes. And there was a provision for queries and grievance redressal was also created. And then finally, the empanelment committee will choose the partners, empanel them, and certify them. What they expected to do was actually to recognize their technical and thematic competency, like whether they are expert in energy sector, whether they are expert in education sector or health sector, number one. Empanel by theme wise, number one. Number two is give them a class or grade actually. Grade them based on their the score, either they are A category organization or B category organization. So initial expectation and thought in the authority while we are all designing its architecture was, so when the tendering was issued, it should go to, like as Paresh was mentioning, it's a limited tender issued for particular class and thematic expertise, the organization's pool actually. It was only released then. So if it is a very large study, probably you need to cover, if you at the state level, if you have to cover some 5,000, 10,000 samples, do a multi-district study, then you only issue that tender to class A or class B organizations, so that because their technical competencies, their HR competencies already assessed, then you are comparing between only that particular class of organization. But unfortunately, that was saturated subsequently at the implementation level. So this is in nutshell the policy, the initial empanelment policy developed and empaneled the organization. It was almost like a 120 day affair, like from starting application to disseminating list of empaneled agencies. 120 days process was timeline was envisaged. What was the advantages beyond just quality report was working with government for policy and program change. These agencies, they they continue their activity, because normally the agencies are working in that particular domain, in that thematic area. The evaluation would only add to their body of knowledge. They would continue to advocate for policy or program change, work with the state. They're part of various committees inside the state. Whatever the knowledge and expertise they generate out of the evaluation study would continuously contribute towards a better policy in the state. Then publishing papers, dissemination of knowledge, that is one of the major limitations we have now. So not allowed, because if you are doing study as part of the government, not allowed to publish papers all the times. So, but when you work in the partners, along with the partners, they could be based on mutual consent. The papers can be published and it can be disseminated. That's another important thing. And contribution to, again, policy development, development thinking, and in the reviews of government policies, that would really, contribute in a long way. But coming to the last portion of my presentation, or sharing way forward, what we need to do either at the state level, it may be, or at the national level. I'm strongly, and I advocate for, empanelment by their categorization. The category of organization should be created, so that there could be a fair competition as well as fair comparison also. That's number one. Secondly, empanelment with thematic area of experience and expertise. Right now, what we have even in Karnataka is anybody can apply for any thematic or any domain study, whether they have HR, whether they have internal capability, whether they have worked in past, that's secondary, but they can apply, at least add more burden to the screening committee to go through their papers and do increase administrative works. And creating independent pool of assessors is very much required, so that we can do a better output grading of evaluation report. In Karnataka, Gram also came out with output grading report to evaluate the evaluation report, actually, how you will say whether the evaluation report is good, bad, or average. So, but to do that, we need subject matter specialists. A pool of assessors are required to be created. And more importantly, capacity development. We need to invest on capacity development, creating an evaluation community. We have researchers, but not evaluators quite often. So we need to invest on developing their capabilities, and evaluation in that should be brought in at the design stage, actually, at the program design stage. It's not when all the implementation is completed, then we think about evaluation. The theory of change and log frame should be an integral part of the program plan. So unless we do that, there's always be a confusion as well as a conflict between the state and the partner organization. So we understand and interpret output and outcome differently. State or some other may understand output, outcome, and impact differently. So the variables we use or index we create, that could completely different, actually. And equity in empanelment is something required to be ensured. Financial turnover quite often is one of the criteria to empanel agencies. But if you take the not-for-profit organizations, the basic principles or ethos, it's a misplaced metric. So normally the cost, budget, turnover of not-for-profit organization always lesser than a for-profit organization, because for-profit organization incorporated with lot of the funds, actually. Either there is some entity invest or initial capital raised and created, but normally not-for-profit organization created without any capital, with lot of passion and commitment to do something. So should be at least equity ensured in financial metric when it comes.
So Raju, I think we are running out of time. We have
come to the last.
Yeah.
Yeah. And IT architecture for empanelment evaluation is something very important. Integrating AI, many things can be eased. Output grading, evaluation announcements, and dashboard, everything can be taken care with that. So I'll stop my sharing and presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Baswaraju. Very, very illuminating. I request all the participants to visit the Karnataka Evaluation Authority website and also GRAM's website. They have done really very, very impressive work on systematizing procurement. With this, now I request my colleague Ruhani from Indian Economic Services to lead us through the Q&A session. Ruhani asked me only easy questions.
Thank you, sir. So let's start with the last section of this webinar, the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. So let's start with a question for Paresh first, from Parameswaram B. So Mr. Parameswaram B is asking why technical evaluation is required for limited tender when you have empaneled based on technical capacity only. Paresh?
Thanks, Rani. So in empanelment, what we end up doing is organizational evaluation, but any evaluation also includes personnel. So once the empanelment is done, as part of limited tender, you have two options. You can go ahead with just financial evaluation, go ahead with lowest cost selection because the technical evaluation is already done. But often we also want to check the team that is going to be deployed on the respective project, which probably is not evaluated at the time of empanelment because we are not even sure of what team members are needed. So if the project requires evaluation of the key personnel, then you might have to do a abridged technical evaluation plus financial evaluation. But if you feel there is no need for key personnel evaluation, you can go ahead with just financial evaluation and on a lowest cost selection basis. Rohani, back to you.
Thanks, Paresh. So next question is for Gulzar, sir. So Sir Tanvi is asking, can the GFR be adopted by states and how can it be customized as per the requirement of states? Request your thoughts, Gulzar.
So thanks. Thank you. Just once. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, ultimately, state governments' procurement policies, be it on consulting services or goods and works, are drawn from the GFR. And several state governments have customized and developed their own policy documents. But then, the whole challenge here is in the specific case of technical consulting services, services in general, and more particularly M&E evaluation services, we need to go beyond the general contours laid out in the GFR and develop specific documents which can be applied for the specific task of hiring these consulting services. So that's the sort of a long answer to it. But then state governments do customize it, customize the GFR for their purposes.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Pavan Kumar. Paresh can probably take up this question. Nowadays, all procurements are to be done through GEM. There are many startup companies listed and having exemption certificate from MSME or any other authority. Such companies do not have proper exposure in respective fields. Please explain what to do when such companies participate in bids because at technical stage, it is difficult to qualify due to having exemption certificate. Paresh, please.
Sure, Ruhani. I'll try to answer that, and Nidhi, if you have any additional points to add, please feel free to chip in. To the best of my knowledge, whenever we are giving relaxations to MSMEs, it's largely under conditions of eligibility, which means you have some prior turnover requirements or prior experience requirements. We can relax that for MSMEs or startups. But when it comes to evaluation, where we are looking at the quality per se, there I think we follow a very impartial view. Where we might probably startups might be given some X percentage higher weightage, let's say whatever, if they score 70, we might enhance it by 10%. We can have such clauses put into the RFP evaluation, but that does not mean you give a blanket yes to any quality that you receive from MSME. So there has to be a balance between encouraging MSME startups, but not compromising on quality per se. So that should be my response to that query. Nidhi, if you would like to add anything there.
Right. Two quick things. One is principally, let us always remember that whatever we want to apply should be pre-specified. So it is very important that bigger firms participating are also aware that a certain leverage or a certain relaxation or exemption is being given to participants who fulfill a certain credential. So that's principal part of it. The second aspect is, again, it all depends on the nature of the assignment we want to get done. So for example, if there is an assignment where certain number of years of experience or presence is important purely as a function of having done more of that work, right? Where in those cases, of course, we need not unnecessarily encourage participation, because we know that we want someone, to be of a certain standing to take part or to partake in that particular assignment. So there one should avoid. But yes, wherever possible, keep the financial capacity, etc., low enough that you encourage a wider and a varying pool. And then you take your pick in terms of, evaluation, etc. But yes, always remember, whatever it is that you want to apply, pre-specify, apply it uniformly, so that there's no advantage that given, in terms of not being pre-specified.
Thanks, Nidhi. Back to you, Ruhani.
Thanks, Nidhi ma'am and Paresh. So next question is from Mr. Ravinder, directed to Nidhi ma'am. So ma'am, can government, semi-government organization or company allowed to give works by nominations directly? Nidhi ma'am?
Well, so considering I dedicated an entire slide to why QCBS and why not L1, so I'll have to take this very delicately and sort of, under the arching principles of the GFR, whether they be applicable or, be the guiding document, depending on whether you're in the central government or the state. So I'm going to borrow the answer straight from the GFR rule. 194, as I understand, deals with it. And it lays out these exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to emphasize on the word exceptional again, where you can give an assignment by nomination or a single source selection. So the first condition it says is that where it represents a natural continuation of previous work carried out by the firm. So let's say a consultant has already done certain work for you, and the new assignment is a natural continuation of it. So that's one situation. The second one being of emergency, natural disasters, etc., where timely completion is of utmost importance. And when I'm saying these words, they come directly from the GFR. The emphasis may be mine, but the language is that of the rules. The third scenario is where that the work that you want to get delivered is proprietary in nature. The ownership of that particular technique or technology belongs to a consultant. So there is no point in opening up, the market to other consultants, because they'll not qualify for evaluation also. So that's your third scenario. The fourth scenario is, where there's adequate justification available for nomination in the context of the interest of the ministry or the department. I would say one of the most general scenarios or circumstances, but here, remember that you will need the approval of the competent authority if your single source falls under this particular category. The fifth and a very critical one is that in a situation where the procuring entity can ensure fairness and equity, particularly if they can ensure that the prices are reasonable and consistent with market rates for tasks of a similar nature, as in, where they can establish that they need not derive the price competitively, and that through nomination, the price that they're getting for the services is at par with the market rates, they can go for single source selection or consultancy by nomination. Once again, this was Rule 194 of the GFR 2017. So I would request the person asking the question to go through the rule for the full elaborate version.
Thank you so much, Nidhi ma'am.
Pleasure.
And next, I think we have a question which DG sir can probably take up. This is a question from Mr. Malaya Mohanty. So he's asking, suppose we opt for limited tender where budget is less than 25 lakhs. However, the consultant proposes financial bid more than 25 lakh, which is exceptionally high. Should we cancel the limited tender or go for it? What may be the limit beyond 25 lakh that we can consider? In case of urgent need, can we exceed the limit of 25 lakhs to go for limited tender with approval of competent authority? DG sir, request your views.
Thanks, Rohan. Basically, the financial proposal, because all the conditions are put ahead of bidding process. So we have already stated that the maximum bid will be 25 lakh. So any financial quote above that maximum limit would automatically become non-responsive. So clearly, the procurement process, if at all everyone bids above 25 lakh, then you have to go for rebidding. But as far as the 25 lakh ceiling is concerned, the Department of Expenditure has authority to, in general or in a specific case, increase the limit. That's one. The second is the state governments, when they're adopting the GFNDR, they can also consider inflation and others. And in some specific cases, they can also give higher limits under the limited tender process. So that's, I think, how we can handle this part. Thanks.
Thank you, DD sir. So next question we have for Paresh. So Paresh, is there a possibility of considering a QBS mode of selection where the budget becomes secondary and you get a quality work and output from the project monitored or evaluated? Please advise. This is done in a few ADB or World Bank projects globally and in India also. This is a question from Mr. Madhusudan Hanumappa. So Paresh, could we request your views, please?
Thanks, Ronnie, and thanks, Madhusudanji, for that suggestion. Actually, in the latest recent guidelines that Department of Expenditure has released, they have actually suggested a new mode of procurement going forward. They call it not QBS, they call it FBS, fixed budget-based selection, which means the budget is already decided at the time before requesting for proposals. So if the budget you feel is 40 lakh rupees, that budget is already decided, then the award of project is purely done based on quality. So based on the technical scores or the evaluation of the technical proposals is how that would be done. So to short answer to Madhusudan to your question, yes, we can go ahead with QBS. We call it fixed budget based selection. And yes, their 100% marks is only to quality. Yeah, back to you, Ravani.
Thank you so much, Paresh. So next question is for Nidhi ma'am from Mr. Pawan Kumar. So ma'am, could you please explain the process to hire government agencies as consultants or contractors for survey work on nomination basis? Whether it can be done through single source, please let us know. Nidhi ma'am.
I think I just covered it. Would you like me to repeat? So we just went through the rule 194 of the GFR, which talks about single source and nomination. So
right.
Would you like me to repeat it?
And for the benefit of audience, you can.
I'll do that, certainly. My pleasure, my pleasure. So very quickly, like I was saying that, of course, not to be the preferred choice, but the GFR lays down some exceptional circumstances in which you can go for nomination or single source consultancy. But I'll go through the 5 exceptional circumstances with a rider that a case needs to be made, or rather a very thorough case needs to be made for which of these 5 circumstances you can fall under. The first situation or circumstance in which you can go for engaging a consultant through nomination is when the work that you want get done is a natural continuation of the previous work carried out by that firm. So then you need not again open up, on a competitive bid process because you've already got preceding work done by the same firm. The second situation that GFR allows you to engage a consultant by nomination is that when there is an emergency. As an example, it says situations arising after natural disasters, where timely completion of the assignment is utmost important. The third scenario, where the work that you want to get done requires the use of a proprietary technology or a technique which only one consultant has, or any other expertise that any one consultant has, once again, need not go to the market and opening up a bid process. The said consultant can be engaged through nomination. The fourth one, and possibly like I mentioned earlier, the most broadly framed circumstance is where there are special circumstances where it becomes necessary to select a particular consultant with adequate justification for such nomination or single source selection in the overall interest of the ministry or department. But please remember, when trying to do this under this particular ground, it needs to be with the approval of the competent authority. It is as much stated in the GFR. The fifth and the last circumstance in which you possibly can go for nomination is where you're in a position to ensure fairness and equity, particularly where you can ensure that the prices or the cost that you're getting from this particular consultant through nomination is reasonable and is consistent with market rates for tasks of similar nature. So this is where the GFR lays down in Rule 194 the process for engaging a consultant through nomination. So I would request you to go through the rule, because I've only talked about it in a excerpt manner. Of course, go through the entire rule, and you may then engage the consultant accordingly.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the detailed answer. So next we have more of a comment and less of a question. So in fact, public procurement is a powerful public policy and sustainability tool. It is the essentiality of ERA to propel the professionalization of public procurement in India in line with professionalism principle and the fundamental principles of public procurement envisaged in the GFR 2017. The capacity building of government officials shall be leveraged to postgraduate studies research level exclusively pertains to public procurement, like Masters in Public Procurement Management offered by ITC ILO. So this was a comment by Mr. Sujit. Next, we move on to a question from Madhusudan Hanumappam ji. So he says, I differ in the shortlisting of 5 agencies. So maybe Nidhi ma'am can take this up. So he says, I differ in the shortlisting of 5 agencies on technical score. It should be top 3 only. So Nidhi ma'am, could you?
Right. Madhusudan ji, absolutely. Please feel free to disagree. The beauty of this entire stipulation is that none of the documents, like the stipulation, the model RFP that I was talking about, it was not more than 5. So again, recommendatory in nature. So the GFR under Rule 184 talks in terms of a minimum 3, which I think is aligned with your thought structure, but there's no mandate as to the maximum. So minimum you need to shortlist 3. As far as maximum is concerned, the model RFP recommends 5. The manual for procurement of consultancy and other services, as a matter of fact, recommends a maximum of 8. So yes, I think you're on the right track here when you say that you want to take forward the top 3, because that's the minimum mandate.
Thank you, ma'am. So the last question for today is for Dr. Baswaraju from Mr. Naga Venkateshwar Rao. So he wants to know what is the role of audit in M&E and where does audit intersect with the process of M&E? So Dr. Baswaraju.
Okay, if my understanding is correct, it's a difference between auditing and M&E. Basically, audit normally considered as going for a fault finding mission is basically to go and understand where the mistakes and errors are conducted. It's mostly a financial terminology we borrowed from. But in M&D, especially when it comes to monitoring, I would rather recognize monitoring as a supportive supervision, because it provides a lot of scope for appreciating limitations of program implementation. Normally, monitoring is done while the program is implementing, and evaluation is done after the program completes its probably the lifetime timeline. So in monitoring and evaluation, we also appreciate the positive things done, best practices, as well as the limitations. What are the genuine reasons for the non-accomplishment of the program objectives? That's also the benefit of doubt is given to the implementer as well. But when monitoring in the auditing case, it's normally to understand that the mistakes made. That's my understanding.
Thank you so much, sir. So now we have a request from Mr. Parth Gautam from the audience. He's an IRS officer. So he raised his hand. So could you please unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, am I audible, please?
Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is either to Mr. Pareshji or Nidhi ma'am. I am Deputy CEO of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana. So we do a lot of lab empanelment, because we do a lot of volumes in terms of drugs is done by us. So all batches are tested at labs. So the process and methods you outlined are used. So our all empanelment is done on N1 basis, and none of the time has QCBS been used till date. And one of the reasons practically which we face is that all the time is one of the reasons why QCBS is not suggested is because there are certain times audit objections which come. one time that why did you keep this criteria, and sometimes even if no audit objections are coming, then sometimes you have complaints that these are restrictive measures. So for example, if I start a lab which is WHO GLP certified, I keep that and I ask 10 points for that. Now all other labs will reach at the very top and say, "Ki, sir, we are not being impaneled if we keep 10 points for that." So one has to make a balance, and it also leads to allegations sometimes of the that we are not really being fair to all the stakeholders and labs of India. Pharma labs are not being supported by us because at the end we are a commercial organization, so having social objectives. So how do you reconcile that, and what would you suggest us to do? So that'll be helpful.
Maybe Nidhi can answer.
So one of the things that I would recommend in this case is that when designing your conditions of eligibility, particularly in terms of the financial capacity, or for that matter, the eligible assignments, etc., while questions can be raised at any point in time, but the proximity of the past experience to the future work, so that needs to be ensured, like in terms of whatever work that you want to get done, the experience that you're seeking should be absolutely connected with it. That's one way to justify it. I know it will not stop the questions from being raised, but perhaps it can be answered by saying that how what you're seeking is directly relevant for the future performance. The other thing is also in terms of, let's say, the capacity of the capacity of the firms or the capacity of the applicants. Again, depending on the key personnel that you want to deploy, want them to deploy, etc., you can design the same and keep it directly relevant again to the outcome that you need, so that should a question be raised, your justification is backed by numbers. Like, for example, if the work needs to be delivered at a certain scale and it requires, let's say, 5 to 6 key personnel, which only a firm of a certain financial strength can have. So use that as a financial capacity mechanism, and then perhaps to justify should a question be raised around why certain firms were included in the process and certain were excluded.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
So with this, I think we're coming to close of this session. But before we go for a short vote of thanks by my colleague Shailendra, I just wanted to check if Gulzar, you have any final comments? Looks like we have some technical issue, but Gulzar, if you are able to hear, do you have any final comments?
So can you hear me?
Okay. Looks like Gulzar, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes,
nothing,
sir,
sir. It's been very useful. Though I would just like to surface this point about making the specific case of procurement of technical consultancy services for M&E. That is a distinct activity in and on itself, which needs standard documents, which are different from anything which is available there. Because, like, for example, I mean, you have an intervention in agriculture. It's supposed to generate some farm income increase or productivity increase. Is it really making an impact? What's the sort of, and one would imagine there are 4 or 5 such categories of impact evaluations that we should be targeting at, or that would form perhaps 85% of the universe of relevant impact evaluations, relevant in the sense which are top of head for systems or bureaucrats. If we could sort of in some way identify those or categorize them and figure out some guidance and model documents for them, that would be extremely useful for stakeholders, from district collectors to heads of departments to state secretariat, to sort of go ahead and initiate procurement. That's one thing which I mean, and I'm narrowing it down considerably down to one specific area of M&E, technical consulting service providers. Thank you.
Thanks.
But it's been very useful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gulzar. I think you raised a very, very important point. We are here, of course, largely focused on strengthening monitoring and evaluation ecosystem. So we are trying to build a web-based capabilities, so that we address some of the requirements of our colleagues in ministries and departments as well as states. So over a period of time, I think we will be uploading all the terms of references that we have developed for various studies. We will be uploading all the RFPs. In fact, they are there, but we'll put them in a consolidated manner, maybe by individual sector. And we are also going to launch extensive large-scale surveys across the country for food subsidies, fuel subsidy, and so forth. So we will also be uploading all those instruments and also the survey methods and so forth. So thank you for your suggestion. We will seriously take up that work. With this, now I request my colleague, Deputy DG Shailendra to give his word of thanks.
Surely, sir. Thank you, sir. This is actually my privilege to now formally thank all the participants, speakers, the panelists for the day, for today's webinar. And we really hope that the webinar on procurement of technical consultancy provided key insights to everyone based on the presentations, discussions, and some ideas for the future that were shared by the panelists today. We have all agreed during the session that the procurement of technical services and with a particular focus on monitoring and evaluation can go a long way in strengthening the monitoring and evaluation ecosystem. And we will together continue to work in that direction. I wish to extend my gratitude to the speakers, Shri Guljar Natarajan, Dr. Baswaraju Shrestha, Ms. Nidhi Arora, and Paresh Dokar for their valuable contributions to today's discussion. A special thanks to Dr. Shekhar Bonu, DG DMEO, for providing overall guidance and leadership to undertake these activities under DMEO to strengthen the ecosystem. Our webinars for the states, as Mr. Guljar mentioned in the beginning, are being received well, and we will continue to make efforts to make useful interactions with the state going forward as well. Thank you, everyone, and I really thank everyone here at DMEO who has made this event possible. Thank you, Ruhani, especially for all your hard work and putting all those very interesting questions together. And thank you once again to the panelists for all the answers that we could provide today. So let's keep this discussion going. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Deepak, Kapil, also for all the hard work, and thanks to our NIC colleagues also for making this event a success. Thank you.
Absolutely. Right.
Thank
you so much.
I think we close this
everyone.
webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for